Ta-da!
Patrick Dillard, and I used to be a park ranger here at the Wildlife Park. I'm retired now.
Jack Kearns, retired park ranger.
We worked here together. Well, back I started in '86, and Patrick was here many years before me. But we became close friends and worked together. We both became park rangers. I worked in wildlife, and Patrick was on a boat. Now, this park started back in the 1940s. Prior to that, the land was used by a hotel that was up where Publix is now. And a hotel built an observation platform where you could go up and look down into the spring of 10,000 fish. They had a beach on the other side of Garden Spring, and I understand they had a bathhouse there. And if you were a guest of the hotel, you could actually rent a bathing suit. Now, that seems kind of strange, but at that time, you actually rent a bathing suit. Now, to build that platform, the hotel hired an engineer, and he went out there where the spring is, and when he walked out there and he looked around, he said, "This has got to be one of the most beautiful places in the world," and I kind of agree with him. Now, Patrick is unique in that he is a born and raised old Homosassa. And Patrick can tell you what the park was like when a Mr. Elmo Reed started. It was a Mr. Elmo Reed and two other men that bought the land where the park is.
Elmer Reed owned the park. I was probably about 10, 12 years old, and we used to swim across the river to go to the Garden of the Springs. We used to swim across there. When the museum is located now, that used to be where the gift shop used to be and the toll collector. Where the grass and all that in the Garden of the Springs, they used to be the parking lot when Reed's owned the park. But anyway, as soon as you walked out the back entrance after you got your tickets, it was that tier thing. He's talking about the boardwalk, and then they built two more boardwalks on top of that. But then they decided to put what they call a pillbox. It would hold about 12 visitors, had two pieces of glass, and they called it a pillbox. You go down one flight of stairs and would go out the other side. It would hold about 10 to 12 visitors at a time. And the only animals they had here was the gators and a few otters and the wildlife birds. Not the birds in captivity, just wild birds would come in to hand people bread to feed the fish. And the spring over there where the catfish was so thick when I was a little kid that you could dip them up with a net. You'd throw that bread out, they'd be on top of each other. Saltwater catfish. I don't know where all the catfish went, I don't know. The trails, it's just like if you had a lot of woods behind your house, you started cutting a path through there. That's what the trails looked like years ago. All the roots sticking up out of the ground, they try to cut down the roots as low as they could, but that's what the trails was like back years ago. Anyway, the underwater observatory, the fishbowl, when they brought it from Ocala, but the tank was brought in 6 different pieces. They worked day and night welding that tank together. Before they put it in the water, they was trying to figure out how to get it in the water because it weighed 128 tons. They didn't want to put grease on the skids because they didn't want to pollute the water, so they'd come up with an idea to put bananas. They put bananas, and then the tank was floating on top of the water with the glass above the water, so they filled it full of concrete and steel and sunk it down to where it's at today. The boardwalk you walk upon is on a big hinge, so when we get hurricanes or heavy rain, that thing goes up and down with that hinge. Like I say, we used to swim across the river, and the lady at the gift shop there, or toll collector, would be soaking wet, and they'd say, "Do not come in this building with them wet clothes on." So we knew how to go around the back way where the employees went through. Where Publix is today, there was another shopping center at one time. The post office used to be over there. They used to have
Was the doctor's office?
Doctor's office, a barber shop, the grocery store. But where Publix is and Hardee's is located today, Jack was talking about that, the old hotel owned by Davy Vance. There's pictures of him too around. He used to be a baseball player.
He was a pitcher for the Yankees.
Yeah.
Dazzy Vance.
Davy Vance.
Dazzy.
Dazzy Vance, I'm sorry. But there's pictures of him too in the lobby. But when Mr. Norris bought that property and started development, he did not operate the stores over there. He just leased buildings out, the grocery store too. But he gave the building to Howard's Flea Market down here. The older man that started Howard's Flea Market. He's no longer alive. But anyway, he's the one that tore it down. They told him when he tore it down, they wanted it raked and very clean when he left there. Because they wanted every piece of concrete block. The bathtubs that used to be in there in that old hotel, we still own one of them today. My mom bought it for $10. It's got the old line feet on it, and it's in my mom's house. I've had people want me to give it to them, sell it to them, but I told them it wasn't for free and it wasn't for sale. It's worth more than $10. I don't know what it's worth, but anyway, they offered me $1 million. It's gone.
You see this building, and you look at the hotel across the street, and the building down in the fishbowl, you notice the construction, the stone, it's all the same. Now, this was Mr. Norris, started this back in the 63.
He's talking about the beautiful rocks on the side of the building and the shopping center over there. But he's talking about Mr. Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson, he didn't have to get out here in this parking lot and work if he didn't want to. But he enjoyed it. He was about as powerful as he was tall, or maybe a little more powerful. Well, he was one of Mr. Norris's main men. He poured the slabs out here in this parking lot, put this rock in the concrete. They lifted up after it got dry, and they picked it up, put it on these flatbed trucks, took it over to that shopping center, and put it on the wall. And that's a shame they tore all that building down, but, progress.
When Norris bought it, he was not going to make a park out of it or an attraction. What he wanted was to develop the whole thing. So he got Ferguson, Fergie. When the development fell through, Fergie came up with the idea of making this an attraction. Pepper Creek was the biggest expense that they had, dredging that creek. But the first boats were actually just regular pontoon boats with lounge chairs on it, beach chairs. They didn't have the big boats that they have now until later. Patrick, you worked here, right?
Yeah, they'd hold about 10 to 12 visitors at a time. But if you wasn't a good docking person, which I wasn't when I first started, these little chairs, if you hit that dock, those chairs, people went with them. And the big boats they have today, they had other boats when North. One of them come from the World's Fair.
Yeah, New York World's Fair.
New York World's Fair. And then they finally got rid of the small boats. You couldn't hold enough people, so they got 3 more boats. But the first one they got, the biggest one, was the one from the World's Fair. But the ones they have out here now, the state of Florida had those built.
Yeah, the boats from the World Fair, somebody saw it there and realized that this would be a great boat for the attraction. They actually had 4 of them here, but there were 2 others. They were over on the river. One went all the way up to the Crow's Nest restaurant to take people up there, and there was another one that was used as a cargo to take stuff back and forth up to the Crow's Nest. And the Crow's Nest restaurant was at the mouth of the Homosassa River at the Gulf. It was a beautiful spot to go up. Take your boat up there or take the boat from the hotel, and you could go up there and sit and look at the Gulf, and they had goats. They had a spiral staircase that went up to the Crow's Nest, and these goats would climb those stairs, and they would get up on the roof of the restaurant. And as you were out there, you could see these goats climbing all over the place.
We talk about this boat here that would only hold about 10 to 12 visitors. If on a real windy day, you had fun, because that wind would catch it, turn you around, push you into the trees. Well, the ones they have today they're a little tricky too with the wind, especially docking. But I've trained a lot of employees, volunteers here. But when I first started driving the boats, we'd be leaving here, this is West Visitor Center, going to the West Entrance, and the driver that was training me, that's when Norris owned it. I told him I would dock it this time. He said, good. So I'd see the dock. I said, I'll tell you what, will you dock it this time and I'll try it the next time? He said, no. He said, you going to be a boat operator, you going to learn to dock. I knocked a few pieces of concrete off and boards. But anyway, it's a little tricky to dock them, but once you learn it, it's okay.
Now, when you took the boat from here down the creek, years ago they used to have flowers along the creek. There was azaleas. If you get down a little ways, there was citrus trees there. They were delicious, let me tell you that. Patrick and I used to come back with an empty boat. We'd pull over and pull some of the citrus off the trees. Well, the state took them out because citrus are not native, so any non-native plant they were taking out. But as you went down a little further, Patrick could tell you the first island you met.
Goat Island.
Goat Island.
Yeah. And the next island had the little squirrel monkeys on it. We called one of them named Jimmy Carter, Billy Carter, Ronald Reagan, Dolly Parton, and one of them named after me, Patrick, and one named George.
Prior to that, years earlier, there was, I think, over 30 monkeys on that island at one time.
Yeah.
And slowly, the population, red-tailed hawks used to love monkeys. One of them got a monkey once, and Patrick went down there, and the hawk and the monkey were in the water, and this guy jumped off the boat and went over, and he rescued the monkey. I don't know whether it was the one that was called Patrick or not, but
I didn't see it at first, but some visitor said that hawk just flew down and got that monkey. I got off the boat, and the hawk turned him loose, and we took him to Midway. But when they sink their claws into their body, all the damage is already done, so he didn't survive.
Now, when you went down the creek, Patrick said the first island was called Goat Island. But after years, the main character on that island at one time was a large black spider monkey. His name was Jojo, and Jojo owned that island. Anything that was on that island belonged to Jojo and came under his protection. If there were goats on there, Jojo protected them. There was a turkey on there, Jojo protected them. Years ago, everything in the park was red and yellow. We had canopies on the boats, red and yellow. The seats were all red and yellow. And Jojo's hut out there, lean-to and all that, were red and yellow. And when we went out there to work, they needed painting. We'd take the paint out there. And for some reason, Jojo loved vinyl paint. And he would stick his hands in it. And he would stick his mouth down in it. Now, one time, I was out there painting, trying to keep him away, and he put his hands in the paint, and he put his mouth down in it, and along comes a boat loaded with tourists, and here is this black spider monkey with 2 red gloves and a big red face. Now, you can imagine what that looked like, that was Jojo. Also, one of us went out there to work, clean up the island. He would not allow everybody. He'd allow Patrick or me on or Rosemary. But if you went out there, you had to take 2 things with you, a mower and a weed whacker usually, because when you took them off the boat and put them on the island, one of them belonged to Jojo. And he would sit on it, and he'd sit there, and if you went over near it, he'd go, and he had these rotten teeth, and you looked at his mouth, you say, okay, Jojo, and you went and used the other one. Now, when he got tired of the one he was sitting on, he'd come and take the other one away from you. And it was the same thing. And you say, okay, Jojo, you got it.
You're talking about when Mr. Reed owned the park at the time. You know where Burger King's located here? They used to be that guy, Paul Ritchie. He used to have a garage there. At one time, worked on cars, had pumped gas, and then Mr. Reed's had a restaurant there. And behind his restaurant, he had gators back in the back. He's the one that had the park like it was with the nature trails.
Yeah, he had the gators over by his restaurant so that people traveling through, going down south, he had a sign up there, stop and see live Florida alligators, so it's kind of an attraction. And then he bought this park. And the park remained that way until early 1960 when Bruce Norris bought it. And the gators that were in there, all those gators were seeded by a man named Bob Trotter. Now, you may notice that there's Trotter Real Estate over here, and that was Bob Trotter's business. But before that, he was a fishing guide and an alligator trapper. And at one time, we had a crocodile in here, and we called him Jake. And he grew to about 15 foot long, and he weighed about 1,000 pounds. And Mr. Trotter brought that crocodile in here, and he brought him in here in the 40s. And he got that crocodile out of Lake Tarpon, down in Tarpon Springs. And I asked Bob, I said, what was the crocodile doing up in Lake Tarpon? He said, I don't know, but I found out that it was there, and we went down and trapped it and brought it up here. That croc was here for quite a few years, wasn't it, Patrick? And he was the boss. I mean, when he was in that gator lagoon, all the gators went up on the beaches because he was so big and so strong that no gators came near him. And at that time, we used to put fish or chicken on a clothesline and run it out, and the gators would jump up to get it. But when Jake wanted to eat, no gator would near that chicken or fish.
You're talking about running the string on, they had the 2 bicycle wheels, would run it, and the gators would go after it. But I used to do the gator program, and you'd bang on the side of the sign, and they would jump up. You'd hold it like that, and they'd jump it up and take it out of your, not out of your hand because you had a string. You wasn't about to take hold of it, put your hand there. But they could take their tail and the length, push themselves up. I understand they can jump out of the water the length of their body.
They would flip right up in the air and grab that fish or chicken that you hung out there for them. That was quite an amazing sight for the visitors that were here. And on the other side of that bridge was our famous hippopotamus, Lucifer. We call him Lou now because some people said that the name Lucifer was not a nice name. But he was the big attraction in there. Lucifer was born in San Diego, California, and he was brought here, I think, when he was about 3 or 4 years old. And he's been in that little lagoon over there since he was 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah, he was with the Aventures.
Yeah,
movie
he's
company.
now 53 years old.
That same
Yes,
yeah.
he's been in there. He's never gotten out of there. Now, when we had the no-name storm, the water got up so high in the park. Some areas were 5 or 6 foot. We were afraid Lou was going to get out over that wall. The fear was that if he got out of there, he would be so frightened he would probably be dangerous. So we had to stay all night and babysit Lou. And what we would do, looked like he was getting nervous, we'd call him over and rub his gums and give him some food and keep him happy. So all night long we babysit this 6,000-pound hippopotamus so he wouldn't get out on us. We had 13 alligators get out of the alligator lagoon. 13 gators were loose in the park. Now people would say, oh my gosh, but you know, the gators they were out of there, they were out of their natural habitat. All they wanted to do was get back in it where they were before. And we had one gator that got in with the manatees in the manatee lagoon, and he was there for a few weeks, and he never bothered the manatees. In fact, one day I was walking from the wildlife care building, come down the trail, and there's a gator laying in the trail. And I went, what am I going to do now, you know? So I grab a pole and I'm pushing him, trying to get him back to where I can open the gate and let him in. And just then, one of the workers came across the bridge and he came around and he went, oh my gosh, there's a gator. I said, don't worry, I got a pole. All he wants to do is get back in there. Don't worry about it, just come around alongside. Well, he came alongside and that gator at the time lifted up his head and he went, that man jumped up and I think he was running before he hit the ground. Well, all we did was I told him to go get some other rangers, and we just grabbed that gator by the tail and dragged him back and put him back in the gator lagoon.
Any of you people ever see the pictures out here on the platform of Santa Claus with his own reindeer? That was Santa Claus here.
Uh-oh.
The reindeer
We weren't going to tell him about
attacked at him. And he was trying to fight.
Wait a minute. It was Sue's fault.
Yeah, they was in there taking some pictures with Santa Claus and with his reindeer. Well, that reindeer didn't like you.
No, that was that name was Ichiban, and he had his antlers, and he was in a rut, and they insisted. You know, I put a Santa Claus suit on and go in there, and Sue was with me, and we had some photographers and a reporter. And we got in there, and I said, listen, if he starts to act up, I'm going to tell you, get out that gate, and I'll take care of him. So he did act up, and the reporters and the photographers went out the gate, and I went out the gate, and I hear, Jack, and I said, what? And I look, and Sue's still in there. And Ichiban's got Sue trapped against the fence. And I had to go over and I grabbed them by the antlers, and naturally they took pictures, and the picture was up, and it even made the Daily News of New York. It was called Rudolph's Revenge.
I was talking about one Norris on the park too, and that building down there is a museum today. But at that time it was the gift shop when Norris owned it. But they had a man here named Mr. Bob Livingston. They used to have orchids. They used to grow beautiful orchids here, and you could purchase them at the museum area.
They had flowers in the back. They had these huge hothouses back there where they grew the flowers in, and they had poinsettias that people would say they can't be, but I swear they were 20 foot high. It was huge. It was a huge hothouse, and they grew all these exotic plants back there. Wasn't that where Ivan Tours was back there also?
Yeah. That's where he used to take the animals and work with them. They had Judy the Chimp, Clarence across that line, General Ben, and if you seen any of the pictures out in the lobby too, somebody did wrestling a bear. Did you see that on one of those easels? That was me.
Yeah, that was Patrick. One day I picked up a Florida magazine, years gone by, and I'm looking through the magazine, and I said, wait a minute, that's Patrick Dillard. There he is wrestling a bear. So I got to talk to him about the bear, and he told me, well, you could wrestle a bear, but you had to know how it was feeling at the time.
He was a lot of fun though. I think they said he weighed around 600 or some pounds. But a man come through one day, a visitor been here before, and it was a real hot day, and he asked me when was I going to wrestle the bear again. But it wasn't General Ben, it was General Ben's stand-in. But the gentleman that took the pictures from Florida Sportsman's magazine asked me some questions if he could take pictures. So I asked another guy was here, worked with me. I said, is it okay? And he said, sure. The advertising for the park. So anyway, this other man come through though and asked me when I was going to wrestle the bear again. I said, I'm not. He said, why? I said, because he's hot, he's tired. He said, well, I brought all these visitors here, my family, told him you're going to wrestle the bear. And he kept on pleading with me to wrestle him. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll wrestle him one more time and I'll quit. I walked up to that bear, And that was the last time I walked up to him that day. He grabbed me, and he put his mouth around my neck, and he threw me across the grass and knocked the wind out of me. That was it for that day. But when we, late in the afternoon, after we quit wrestling him, we'd let him cool down for maybe a couple hours or something, or an hour or so. When he got cooled down, then would stop people from coming into Garden Springs, and I'd release the chain, take the chain off his neck. They had the collar and everything, but just to release that hook. And he'd head right to the water, to the springs. I'm not the fishbowl area, but the Garden Springs. And I'd tell Buck, I said, all right, get in the trailer, it's time to go back to your cage. You couldn't pull him out of that water. I'd hook that chain around that collar, I'd pull on him, and he'd pull me back. And but he enjoyed that spring water, which I don't blame him. But we used to let him ride in it was a lawnmower we used to pull him down there with a trailer. It'd take you a good half hour to get down to Garden Springs because everybody stopped you, wanted to take pictures of him. He looked like a giant for sure in that little trailer. But he'd ride in that trailer down to the Garden Springs. And we had another one named Twitter. We used to wrestle him too, but I don't remember, he must have weighed probably about 100 pounds or a little bit.
Oh, I didn't see him. I didn't wrestle bears.
But
I wrestled the deer.
Yeah. We used to hold him down, and he'd moan, and then he'd finally get you where he wanted you. He'd put his back feet in your stomach, and then he'd flip you.
Not when I worked there, when Patrick worked here. It had some sea lions in the little lagoon. On one side was otters, the other side sea lions. And they had these dispensers where you could take little fish out, put a quarter in, take the fish and feed them to the sea lions.
Oh, the otters too, yeah.
Oh, the otters also. They had chimpanzees here also.
Right.
And Patrick said that the chimpanzees, well, they had some dirty habits at times. So you had to watch out what they were throwing at you from their cages.
Yeah, the chimpanzees we had was named Tiny, Cindy, and Freckles. That was the three chimps we had. Yeah, I used to put them up too. I was scared to death of them when I first started putting them up. But you get used to them. Then you try to give them, if they got sick, they just like a human being, you get a cold or something like that, try to give them medicine and a marshmallow. Well, sometimes they'd be smarter than you. They'd take the marshmallow, open it up, throw the pills out. But when that happened, though, J.P. Gardner, or some of you people may have remembered J.P. Gardner, who used to be the manager here when private owners had it, and then he was assistant manager when the state took over for a while. But he'd have to tranquilize them, and then he would have to give them a shot and everything. But J.P. was very good with the animals, very good.
He was excellent.
Yeah.
J.P. was, for one time, was a trapper down Central and South America. He went down here, he used to trap wild animals. I asked him at one time, I said, did you ever trap any jaguars? He said, oh yeah. Every time you'd ask JP something, oh yeah. I'd say, JP, you ever eat this kind of meat? Oh yeah. I said, well, how'd you trap the jaguars? He said, well, you waited till the rainy season and water came up real high and they were out on the island by themselves. He said, that's the way you could trap them. JP used to anesthetize the animals here in the park. And he used to, when JoJo needed a physical, he used to knock JoJo down. Boy, JoJo knew him and hated JP.
Jack didn't tell you the story about it. Talking about JoJo used to be on the island, the spider monkey. All the boats were through for today. He was out there on the island. I don't remember what you were doing. JoJo got on the boat, untied it. The current got the boat in the wind, and Jack turned around to look for his boat. The boat, spider monkey, was down the creek. He had no other choice. We didn't have radios at that time, so he had no other choice but jump in the water, swim with the boat.
Yeah, well, I was out there with Rosemary, and the boat's drifting away with JoJo on it. I looked at Rosemary, and she said, I'm not going in. So in I went and swim after the boat and get JoJo back. He loved the boats. If you pull that boat up there, he had to get on it. He'd grab the bars and swing around. But he also used to leave a little souvenir or something that he was there on each of the seats, and you had to wash them off. Yeah, that's the kind of guy he was.
We used to have a park ranger here, too, named Cheryl. JoJo got on her boat. She was by herself. She was running from the visitor center, going back to the west entrance to pick up more people to bring them back. And JoJo got on the boat. She got too close because he'd always liked to race with the boats. He'd run alongside the bank. But he got on the boat, and he started walking back there where she was at. And he reached his arms out to give her a hug. And when she thought he was going to hurt her, so she hit him. Well, he bit her.
Yeah.
I told her I'd bite her, too. She hit me right in the jaw or wherever she hit that monkey. But she wouldn't go back out there. They used to go in the creek too, get people's valuables out from an expensive camera, or they might have dropped their pocketbook, slid over. And I've had people say, I wouldn't go in that water for $1 million. I said, well, I've been in this water. She said, I pray to gators. I said, I ain't worried about the gators. What I really worried about when I was in there was water moccasins. Years ago, I used to think of water moccasins couldn't bite you underwater, but they can. They cut a flange in their throat. But I never had no trouble. I used to go in there with no shoes on and feel on the bottom for what I was looking for. If anybody needs a movie camera, video camera, a Russ Spencer one, there's one there just before you get to the West Entrance. I went in the water trying to find it too, and I never did find it. It was over my head, and I dove down there trying to feel. But the man told me not to worry about it. He said that it had insurance on or something.
Anybody have any questions before we go? Yes, ma'am.
I know there are monkeys down at the old Homosassa on the river.
They were put down there by the park. Actually, that island was made with dredging. That was not a natural island. Norris owned it. We were talking about Norris. I just want to let you know that Norris owned the Norris Cattle and Feed or something up in Chicago. He also owned the Detroit Red Wings, and he owned the Red Wing Disposal Company that was here. Now, if you went down to Fishbowl Drive and stood there and pointed in almost any direction, you could point to where Bruce Norris owned something. He owned the Yardarm Restaurant, Riverside Village. He owned the Crow's Nest Restaurant. You come around, he owned the Riverhaven Marina, the Riverhaven Village. You come up here, and he owned his property across the street. He owned this building, the hotel, and he also owned all of the sugar mill property. So he owned quite a bit here. Yes, sir.
You were talking earlier about this 160-ton...
128 ton, yeah.
Is that floating in there?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Sometimes if you come here, the water's pretty high. You'll see that. You'll see the hinge. You can't see exactly. You just see where it's going together.
It just never dawned on me that it's floating.
It's
Yep.
stationary
It's
there.
made out of concrete, you know?
Yeah.
Everything don't float.
Steel and concrete. In fact, a no-name storm, it was so high to get up on it, I had to grab the rail and climb up the platform to get up there. It floated up so high. Is there any other questions before we go?
Wasn't that a broom that Cheryl was swinging at JoJo? Wasn't she trying to hit him with a broom?
Probably.
I picked her up, but she was in the water. And the first thing she said, give me a cigarette. She was nervous.
All right, thank you, folks. I hope you enjoyed our little speech.